Welcome to another episode of research at the Albert Hirschman Centre on Democracy. Today we welcome Yanina Welp, research fellow at the Centre, and Santiago Gerchunoff, professor of political theory, Carlos III University in Madrid, for a discussion on Albert Hirschman's enduring legacy.
On February 13 and 14, 2024, our center organized a public event and a workshop to explore Albert Hirschman's seminal insights. The event was co-organized by the Albert Hirschman Centre on Democracy and the Red God Network and supported by the Swiss Society of Americanists. Scholars from different disciplines and countries, informed by the Hirschman tradition, met to exchange on how this tradition enables to grasp specific research and policy issues. Among the participants, we had Santiago Gerchunoff, a philosopher based in Madrid who has edited Hirschman's books in Spanish. Santiago, welcome and thanks for accepting to join our conversation today.
Hello, Yanina. Thank you very much for this invitation, for the invitation to the workshop. That was an incredible experience, and now for having me here to talk about that experience. I am very glad to be here.
Thank you, Santiago. My first question for you relates to your connection to Hirschman's works. Could you tell us when and how did you find it, and to what extent it influenced your thoughts as philosopher?
Yes, it is very interesting for me to speak about that. Really, I have known Hirschman since I was very young, because I mean very young, 12 or 13, something like that, because Hirschman was an author that my father, that is an economic historian, always talked about, and he got to meet him in person on one of Hirschman's trips to Latin America, and he always talked very, he was very enthusiastic about Hirschman thinking, and always telling me that he was one of the most brilliant economic thinkers that was at that time writing and thinking. So I had that idea since I was very young in my mind. But really, actually, I really came to read a book of Hirschman a long time later than that. It was like 20 years from that, when I was in Madrid and I was working on my doctoral thesis, and I came across with a book. I wasn't looking for a Hirschman book. It was totally without. It was not voluntary from my point of view. It was like something that happened because I was studying a discussion between Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Benjamin Constant on the relation of ancient citizenship and modern citizenship, and the kind of liberty that ancient people and modern people had and has to have. And I came across with shifting involvements, and I came across that with the fact that Hirschman was thinking very similar things that what I was thinking about. So that moment was very important for me, and finally my thesis was a discussion between Hannah Arendt and liberal classical thinking, and finally I find that in the same book, in Shifting Involvements, there was some arguments, some ideas that finally were very, very important to end my own argument. It was the ideas around the problem of the lack of expressiveness of the vote, and in the conclusions of my thesis, these Hirschman ideas were key, really important. And then I have another story with Hirschman, and after that, working as a bookseller, that I worked as a bookseller for a lot of years. I organized reading groups around different books, And I organized one around the passion and the interest. And the kind of customers I have in that bookshop, it is in Vallecas, like a very world-class neighborhood in Madrid. And the people that was coming to the reading group were like kind of Marxist militants, trade union militants with that kind of background. So the passion and the interest was very they were very interested in the book, and it kind of changed their idea of the origins of capitalism. And it was very interesting for me to see that kind of change and to spread the Hirchman ideas in this kind of people that they didn't know Hirchman, they didn't know the story, they didn't know anything. So it was. I am proud of that Hirchman spreading ideas thing that I made.
I'm quite sure Hirschman have loved to know about this experience, this kind of cultural or social activity with the workers and with the Marxist tradition. And I find very interesting also your philosophical way through finding Hirschman and the family connection. During our public event, the YouTube event is uploaded in our channel. Also, Shalini Randeria told us about a similar relation with Hirschman through her father. Now, let me move to my second question to you, which relates to the workshop we conducted on February. And the focus of the workshop was on the ideas of paradigms as obstacles to understanding and the revival and adaptation of exit voice and loyalty. Could you please share with us what aspects appeared as particularly interesting or novel to you during this conversation?
Yes, of course. The first thing that struck me was how true it was that Hirschman thought is still alive and useful for thinking about our world. I was able to listen to lectures on the most diverse topics, from the management of the debts of central banks in Latin America to the amazing story of the flight of a group of women from Afghanistan. It was a lot of things, and you can see, the thing is that you can see that it's not something that you say to because it's like it sounds good that Hirschman is alive. You can see, you could see in the lectures that he's really alive. His categories, his idea. There were some interventions that particularly caught my attention, either because I would never have imagined the context in which Hirschman's thought could be applied, or because of their brilliance. For example, I found Sung-Min Ro's paper on the changing labor market in Korea and its relationship to the gender. It was fascinating for me. I wouldn't have imagined Hirschman acting there, and it was really amazing. Or Martin Hayek's story of protest strategies in the late communist era in the Czech Republic. It was great for me, especially there was a kind of innovation inside Hirschman thought. The idea of Hayek that the concept of voice in Hirschman could be divided in two more categories, legitimate voice and illegitimate voice. It was a very clever intervention. I was also very interested in Matthias Dewey's work on the informal labor market in Buenos Aires conurbation and the uses of digital payments and new market niches. I mean, in all of them, one can feel the validity not only of the Hirschmanian categories, but also of Hirschman's ways of thinking, the kind of curiosity typical of him. It was incredible for me. It was very, very interesting.
I fully agree, Santiago. I have the same impression, this vibrant Hirschman tradition, and also interesting to move from Latin America to Asia, Europe, more philosophical topics, supranational legal frameworks, very specific issues on political participation. Very, very interesting and a clear proof that Hirschman's thoughts are really useful to think contemporary debates and topics. So I would like now to focus on your own work. You presented about the contemporary democratic challenge. You already mentioned part of that you feel can be productively approached by using Hirschman's lens, despite Hirschman did not talk specifically about it. Could you tell us more, please, about it?
Yes, the thing is that, as with many other classical thinkers, it amuses me to fantasize about how they would have theories about relevant historical events that they never got to witness. I mean, for example, what would Marx have thought about cryptocurrency? What would Hegel have written about the atomic bomb, about the real threat of the disappearance of the human species? In the case of Hirschman, questions could be asked about many social or political phenomena that he did not get to see. But personally, the one that interests me most, because it is my field of investigation, is what would Albert have thought and written about the internet. That was what I am interested in more. What he would have said about the internet. I'm not meaning the internet in general, and I'm not pointing to, I don't know, some kind of things that are not very attractive to me. What have Hirschman thought about, I don't know, e-commerce or the algorithm? I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to something more specific that is my own concern, and it is what Hirschman would have thought about the internet as a mutation of public space. Is it a real public space of debate that takes place on the internet? Could Hirschman's reflection on the problems, the disappointments of collective action be connected with what happens every day in digital social networks? And the thing is, what interests me more, and I fantasize about that, is that what I am sure is that he would not have take a fatalistic or necessarily pessimistic position to think the internet as a public space. I am referring to the fact that currently the most common position is to think of social networks and digital communication in general as a failure of public debate, as a flawed space for debate, full of falsehoods, narcissism, polarization, and other diseases that would disable it as a space, as a real space of public action to be taken into account. And I think that Hirschman insight, I fantasize, it would be the contrary of these fatalistic and pessimistic positions. And I have some little evidence on these not fatalistic insights in the possible Hirschman approach to internet as a space of public debates. Returning to my first encounter with Hirschman in shifting involvements, we can find some evidence in shifting involvements to this approach, the non-fatalistic approach of Hirschman to digital mass conversation as a real public debate space. On one hand, we have the idea that public action cannot be measured with the same logic as the private consumption, for a specific reason. In the public action, the striving itself is enjoyment. The striving, the effort of the action is already the action itself. No result external to it. It is expected in exchange for the effort. So usually you have the kind of critique you find currently to the digital communication. Is it useful, uselessness, and with Hirschman approach, The uselessness is not an evidence of that something is not usable as a public action. And on the other hand, you have Hirchman was pointing that the institution, that the fundamental institution of the vote, that is the one that organized modern democracy, it's a problem for a desire of expression that he supposed that even modern citizens have, and it is like a kind of repression. So he was considering that there is a desire of expression that is being repressed with the institution of the vote. And I find that the new space in digital mass public conversation, perhaps we can interpret, we can make a new interpretation, not as mere private consumption like narcissism and uselessness space to evade. Instead of that, we can think with Hirchman that something was repressed by the institution of the vote, and now it's coming out. And we can see it in that kind of space. And no one can really escape to the use of this digital mass public conversation, not common citizens and neither politics with responsibilities even can't escape.
I think this opens room for an additional question, because you are based in Madrid, but you are from Argentina. And yes, you were talking about the fatalistic approach to internet and the Hirschman's approach, more, let's say, pragmatic or open to see, identify also positive outcomes. And then in Argentina now, the public conversation goes quite a lot around the new style of public communication of the president Javier Milei. What do you think of this style of communication of President Milei when you try to think it from the Hirschman's lens or Hirschman's approach?
In these days, it's very difficult not to think on Milei's actions. I think Hirchman would have been very interested in Milei's figure in general, and especially in his use of the internet and social networks. Because I think that the approach of politicians to the use of networks was not avant-garde. They were not the first to use it. The first was the people, common people. And that's why they are plebeian uses, not very sophisticated or educated. And I believe that someone as Milei can use and knows how to use these new means of communications well, precisely because in this use, his plebeian condition, his popular origin of someone who does not belong to la casta, as he says, to the caste of politics, is once again manifested. In the jungle of digital mass public conversation, politicians are outsiders. They have somehow ended down there. They have stepped down from the parliamentary podium to get into the mud of the digital discussion because they had no choice, because there is a change, I think, in the political structure as a result of the eruption of digital technology that we have not yet been able to dimension. I think that Hirchman would help us. Just as we know that it is difficult to think of the structure of the modern state and the representative democracy without the invention of the printing press, we still do not know what mutations the eruption of the internet may have on our political structure. One that we already know is that politicians, and for Milei this is easier than for others, have had to step down from the podium and vulgarize themselves in a more horizontal way. They have to change in a more horizontal ways their modes of communications and debate. Milei is a great example on this, and I think that Hirchman would be for sure very, very interested in this case.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And as you said, it's a novel topic that we still need to approach. And Hirchman, for sure, would be very useful to proceed on that direction. So thanks a lot, Santiago, for your participation, and we hope to keep in touch.
Thank you again, Yanina. It was a pleasure. And yes, please, we have to still in touch and still thinking and talking about Hirschman's legacy.
Thank you for listening to Research at the Albert Hirschman Centre on Democracy. Subscribe to our RSS feed for more episodes.